and I am your host, U.S. Army retired Colonel and veteran combat medic, Dr. Damon T. Arnold. Today, I have a distinguished panel. Uh, it's Congressman Danny K. Davis, the Honorable Illinois 7th Congressional District Congressman and America's Heroes Group Advisory Board member. And we also have Alphecca Muttardy, is a professional macroeconomist, former senior economist, International Monetary Fund. She's also chief economic advisor for the Coalition for a National Infrastructure Bank. I was able to hear the talks that would be given at the DNC, and I'm sure they've done this across the board with different groups, but they are a group that's dedicated to what I think is a genius plan, a genius viewpoint on how to build our infrastructure. And I'm just amazed at the information that I received during that meeting. So the discussion is the Illinois 7th Congressional District Congressman Danny Davis, NIB, National Infrastructure Bank Coalition 5 trillion bank agenda to fund U.S. infrastructure. And Congressman Davis said he'd be running just a few minutes late. He may have some important things to do, like voting on things for our country. But I'm going to start with Alphecca. Why don't you give us an overview and welcome to America's Heroes Group? But I was really blown away by yourself and the presenters at the who were talking about the NIB and why it's so important for us to be supporting this as people in this country. She is, this is a fantastic idea. So why don't you just give us an overview of what this whole initiative is involving?
Great. Thank you very much for having us. We're really very honored to be with your radio audience today. So, as you said, as you pointed out, I am a macroeconomist. That means I look at the big picture of what's happening with the economy. And I used to work, I worked for 25 years at the International Monetary Fund. When I retired, I thought maybe it would be a good idea to really apply my skills to seeing if I could help with an American policy that would help the American economy and American workers. And this really is it. Congressman Davis has introduced a bill in Congress to create a $5 trillion public bank to lend for infrastructure projects all around the country. Well, why do we need one of those? Because we just cannot adequately finance infrastructure either through the federal budget, the state and local budgets, private capital money. We have money being spent by those different entities, but it's not enough. I'll show you some examples in just a minute. But the idea is this bank will complement budgets, top up all the financing that we need, invest in our economy, invest in our country, fix our bridges, replace all of the lead water service lines, for example, in Illinois, which has the second largest number in the country, fix our roads, build high-speed rail, build much more affordable housing, and really restructure the American workforce so that we have much better paying jobs for families that can, enable them to actually pay their bills. And it's not a new idea. It's been done many times before in our nation's history. The banks aren't around anymore because their charters timed out. But other countries around the world use our model, and they call it the American system, and they have permanent banks in place to finance their infrastructure.
Phenomenal. Yes. And I was wondering, the relationship between this and we had an act that passed, and I think it really blew by the media in a very, in a way that wasn't really focused upon as important a bill as it was an act. But the Inflation Reduction Act, it was August 16th of 2022 when it passed, and it was signed in November. Brought into the you know this international agenda in overseas. Um, I'm wondering what that has to do with the National Infrastructure Bank. It seems like it makes it even more important that we have something like an NIB
Right.
with that in place.
Well, just to go to show you how this evolved over time, when President Biden first came into office, he promoted the Build Back Better plan, which would have done climate change things, would have fixed infrastructure, would have done a whole host of things, and put it in to the, at a budget request of $3.5 trillion. Well, when senators thought about this large price tag, they couldn't agree on how they were going to pay for it. They didn't want to raise taxes. They didn't want to deficit spend. So they made the thing get smaller and smaller and smaller. They broke it into 3 bills: the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the climate part; the CHIPS bill, which is intended to stimulate electronics and manufacturing, that kind of thing; and then the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was really a reauthorization of an investment spending that the government reauthorizes every 5 years. But altogether, all of those things were small. When you see that, when you compare our need, which is $5 trillion, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers, that tracks 16 of the categories the NIB covers. And also we add on, the other things that the NIB added on, like housing and high-speed rail. When you compare that to the Inflation Reduction Act, it's only a tenth of all the money that we need. So the idea is that this would be a big complement to federal spending and also to state and local spending that can't afford to pay for the infrastructure either.
Yes, and one of the things that we're facing now too is also the issue, because you brought it up as one of those 3 arms of the Inflation Reduction Act, was the issue about global warming, and that is really having a tremendous impact on our infrastructure. And we already have an infrastructure that's failing us. Actually was looking at some news reports where some of the signage, actually the poles were falling down in the city. They had been corroded through, and they'd actually passed inspection prior to their falling. So, and we have the bridges that are failing right now. We're seeing all kinds of infrastructure issues.
Right, and climate change is making it worse. So we had a big backlog of bridges that needed to be fixed, and were not paid for through the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. But now we have the climate change impact, and it could be anything from extreme heat causing the bridges to buckle or get locked in their place, or even crumble, according to a new report that came out in the New York Times just yesterday, saying that a lot of these bridges could die prematurely because of extreme heat. Or we have extreme flooding that's eating away at the foundations of the bridge. Or we could have things like they weren't made resilient from a big super tanker striking them, as happened with the bridge in Baltimore Harbor.
Yes. And actually, I was speaking to a friend of mine today, and it was really interesting conversation. But we were talking about, there were some things where we had some military people who were actually working on systems, but they were younger. So when they started to see transistors, they said, "What are those things?" They don't. So there's really a big need for education, right?
Yeah,
In
yeah.
order for us to be able to engage in this kind of process. So is that part of the plan for the NIB, or how does that fit in?
Absolutely, because I do a monthly newsletter, and I call it the Economy and Infrastructure Roundup, because the two things are related to each other. As goes infrastructure, so goes our economy. If we don't invest in our infrastructure, our economy grows more slowly. We run into things like big traffic jams or supply chain problems going through ports or whatever. So the two are definitely related to each other. And the bottom line is that this Infrastructure Investment and Jobs, this National Infrastructure Bank Act, will provide enough funding to not only fix all of the infrastructure, but actually move the needle on the economy, on the American economy. So it'll create 25 million new great paying jobs, family sustaining wage jobs. We want to restructure the labor market so that we have people moving into these out of low paid service jobs and into these better paying technical jobs to repair our infrastructure. We'll be able to really fundamentally raise GDP growth rates, which will bring in new revenues to government, solve our debt problem. And we cannot do all of this through the budget, which has been the traditional approach of Congress. We really need a side bank, an off budget bank to cover all of these big projects.
That's phenomenal. Yeah, and I was wondering, as far as the involvement of the average citizen in this process, what should we be doing to make sure that the government listens to this? And then there's a second one that I was going to ask you another question. So I'm gonna start with that question, and then I'm gonna ask a second question.
Okay, sure. So our coalition is actually a grassroots campaign. We are low budget, don't get money from anybody. We're all volunteers, and we have looped in to help us a lot of state legislators who know what their infrastructure needs are that are not being met through their budgets and are very attuned to things that need to be fixed and are causing big problems. New York is flooding. California and New York don't have affordable housing. Our energy grid is really running dry because of excess demand, because of excess heat, causing, needing more air conditioning, because of new data centers. All these things are happening. The need is great. And so this is an educational program, thrust of the coalition, but it is also an opportunity for anybody to have a voice in formulating federal policy. And how that they can do that is they can go to our website, nibcoalition.com. They can sign up to receive the latest news and events that we're hosting. We usually do a monthly Zoom call nationwide. They can approach their members of Congress and ask them to sign on the bill. Tell them about traffic in my area is just terrible. My plumber, my school teacher can't afford to live here near their place of work. We need to have this bill, and it won't cost the federal government a dime. That's the beauty of it. And we have flyers on the website that you can take to your congressman whenever they have a town hall meeting, and you can bring up the subject and ask them to sign on the bill.
That's phenomenal. And historically, I learned a little bit about the history of it. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit. I think this is the fourth time this has been done, but maybe you can
the
let
very
everyone know.
first, yeah, the very first person who engineered the first bank of the United States was Alexander Hamilton, in conjunction with our first president, George Washington. They recognized that they needed to build America because we had just won the American Revolution, but we were devastated with debt from having fought, the revolution, and we had no industrial base at all. We were just an agricultural economy. So he wanted to use this bank to start our industrial revolution, and built centers in Paterson, New Jersey, to start manufacturing. It extended through the second generation under Monroe and John Quincy Adams. They built the canal system. That was our first transportation system before we even had roads. Abraham Lincoln adopted he wanted to have a third bank, but this niggly Civil War came along, and he had also a financial crisis. So instead, he adopted our first national banking system, employed the same method of getting the bank started, and built the Transcontinental Railroad. And the fourth iteration was the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, started by Republican Herbert Hoover, picked up by FDR, used to get us out of the Great Depression, used to build up our military and finance big projects to win World War II, and lifted up the whole economy. The afterglow of all that investment was a 20-year period of high growth rate and really a moving of a big segment of our population into the middle class on account of this investment in our economy.
Yeah, I'm going to paraphrase Albert Einstein. He used to say, doing something that gives you a bad result over and over again, expecting a different result is a bad idea. But it sounds like doing something that's good over and over again, expecting a good result is probably a good idea.
Correct. And this would be a big compliment to our federal policy. There's no other policy that I can think of that will reverse income inequality, will double GDP growth, will solve our debt problem by bringing in more revenues. It makes money for government. And without that, our economy will go backwards and we will decline. And the example of comparison is what the Chinese did with such development banks. They had 3 of them. They used it to build 27,000 miles of high-speed rail, build new, beautiful train stations, build a whole water grid across their country. We're running out of water. We don't do something, we won't have food in our grocery stores. That's how serious it's becoming, because the drought is in food growing areas, and we really need to pay attention to all of that. There's no money in the budget right now for that.
Yeah, that is such an important point. I remember with the American Public Health Association, actually gave a presentation with some of my colleagues, and it was talking about the water wars, and
Mhm.
how those wars are going on in our southern states right now, Nevada, and they're fighting over water because
Right.
that's really a critical issue,
Yes.
and it's
We have,
really basic survival.
we have $400 billion in the bank, the National Infrastructure Bank, dedicated just to water supply, in addition to all the rest of the 800 billion for water infrastructure like sewage and drinking water. And what our aim is to really and see if we can boost up supplies in the south, the dry Southwest. It's a little bit of a break right now. They had rainfall last year, but the Colorado River the whole system is still declining, and we could lose power and water to 7 states that supply those things to 40 million. That 1/3 of all residents in the Southwest benefit from that Colorado River system, which is running dry.
So that includes homes, schools, hospitals, clinics. I mean,
Everything.
so it's
Yeah.
a public health issue. I mean, at heart,
Yeah.
that we have to respond to this. And uh, one of the things is that members also can actually write their congressional members, right, or contact them saying that this is something that you need to do.
Correct. Just there's a phone number on the NIB Coalition website where you can email your congressman. The bill number is HR 4052 to distinguish it from other proposals in Congress, and ask them to sign on and give them real examples in your area of things that you need, like less traffic and more affordable housing, those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's really critically important, and we just don't pay enough attention to our economy, um, and people, just don't really pay attention to their finances many times. And I know you're looking at it at a macroeconomic level, but even at a micro level, people have to realize you need to be involved in this process and know that you're part of the bigger picture too. That
Correct.
you're actually doing things that can affect your outcome and how things are going. Um, but so the bill HR 4052 is something that people should be, writing into the congressional members about to support this initiative. And I know that Congressman Davis was like the chief sponsor, I think, of the bill itself. But he has many people who are aligning in with him in the congressional level as well, bipartisan, knowing the
Well,
importance
we,
of this.
we don't have Republicans yet, but we're actively
Uh,
seeking them. And we've talked to
uh,
at least 150 Republicans about the needs in their district. Everybody, I mean, up until now, infrastructure had always been a bipartisan issue. But the question is, with big budget deficits and sort of fights over what's going to be in the next budget, this has kind of fallen off the table as far as being part of their what they're paying attention to. But there's huge scope. Every member of Congress is very attuned to listening to their constituents. If you get enough of them talking to the same member, that's how we were able to bring on all of the 40 members that are on co-sponsors of the bill so far.
Yeah, and this and one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about the success that China's had with those three, banks, you know, it provided jobs, it
Yeah,
provided training and education because you
right,
can't put a high-speed rail together if you don't have trained workers.
right.
Um, and that's something that we're sort of falling behind in the world. So as it's an issue of national security, it's an
Mhm.
issue of national solvency,
Yeah.
and our sovereignty as well. And
And
yes,
there's a big role for veterans to play in this too. I mean, there are programs around like helmets to hard hats, where we want to retrain, veterans in these great paying, skilled jobs. These are some of them use the latest technologies, new water systems. Putting up a new and enhancing an electric grid so that it can accept renewable energy coming off of new generation plants. and also provide it to areas that are fast growing or have lots of data centers. These are really on the cusp of things that if we can't keep the lights on, it's going to not be well. It's not going to go well for us.
Yes, and you know, one of the things you just brought up that was really interesting is that, you know, we also now are talking about infrastructure hardening, you know, making sure that as we're rebuilding, we have the right technology, we have the right skill level, and then we have the right fiscal backing to make sure that it's
Correct.
implemented correctly.
Yes.
And so that's really an very important issue. We actually had someone on the last show that was from the Department of Labor, and he was talking about veteran jobs and you know, the program that they have, and it was really a very very good thing. You know, but I can see the intersection of this and also with the educational system that we have to realize that we cannot no longer go without training people on the basic requirements. We have artificial intelligence out here now. We have all kinds of, you know, technologies coming out, and if we're not training our citizens to be able to command those jobs, you know, and bring some of those jobs back home,
Yeah.
this we need the infrastructure for that.
And a lot of this infrastructure is quite complicated to develop, especially when you have
Mhm.
older cities with very old infrastructure and you have to do a lot of drilling and things like that. If you want to watch a documentary on one of the most beautiful things that I've ever seen was the construction of the Crossrail in London that cost $20 billion, but it's like building in a jumbo jet in the air while it's flying. It was really quite amazing technology just to roll something out like that. And we want our workforce to be able to, and our construction companies to be able to do the same.
Oh, okay, great. Well, we have about 4 minutes to go. What I was going to ask you is to actually give your website again in a way that people can actually tune into what you're doing. I think this is one of the most critical meetings I've ever gone to in the last several years, because I feel like such an issue that is so um, germane to our survival and to making sure that we come out of this the right way. So if you can, just give us the
Sure.
information.
The website is nibcoalition.com. You can sign up to receive our information. We have lots of videos explaining how the bank works and how it would specifically promote projects that are needed in specific areas. We have flyers on there, lots of materials that you can use to talk to your congressman about it and learn more about, infrastructure in your area. We really want to expand our promotion for this bill and this bank. So this is kind of like all citizens on deck. This is really something that you can contribute to influencing your national policy to build something that will better all Americans and every single jurisdiction.
Yes. And by the way, they can get involved with it by getting to your website. I told you I'm all in on this. So I'm going to be following what you're doing. We hope to have you back on multiple times in the future. But in the short term, you know, Bill HR 4052 is something that everyone needs to know about. They need to know about the National Infrastructure Bank and what its proposal is to Congress and to write your congressional members. You can write congressional members even if they're in your district. I have Republican and Democratic, uh, you know, all and say, you know, this is something that we need to do. You know, come to the table in a bipartisan way and let's get this done. We have to save our nation. We're talking about saving democracy now. We need to save our nation's infrastructure and make sure it's viable for generations to come. Uh, but, you know, I'll give you the last couple minutes. Anything you want to drive home? I know Congressman Davis is probably still working on the infrastructure bill in DC right now. I can't believe he'd be busy right about now with all the campaigning going on and the presidential campaign.
And the next budget that's upcoming, which is already going to be a difficult, slog again.
But yeah, tell us a little bit more. That's you know, a last minute kind of thing about what you think we should be doing as a nation. You know, and what's your vision?
So my vision is really to make it an even playing field for all Americans. We need to reboost our middle class. We need to help our poor. We need to solve our debt problem. And we could do all of that with this bank, which is big enough to fix everything, invest in our economy, and really help the American worker to be much better off with a great paying job.